Maximilien Robespierre. The name itself, it brings up so much, doesn't it? On the one hand, you have the incorruptible, the purest soul of the French Revolution. On the other, the architect of the Reign of Terror. It's this massive contradiction. So the question is, how does one person become both a symbol of hope and a monster? And that's really the core puzzle we're going to try and piece together here. Robespierre's story is this terrifying paradox. It's a journey from championing these incredible humanitarian principles to orchestrating state-sanctioned slaughter on a massive scale. I mean, just look at this. The contrast is absolutely staggering. Here's a guy who passionately argued against the death penalty, yet he ends up overseeing a system that sends over 16,000 people to the guillotine. He was all for universal male suffrage, but then he ruled through this tiny, unelected committee. He defended the oppressed only to become their greatest oppressor. You just have to ask, how on earth did this happen? Well, to even begin to understand the tyrant, you first have to meet the idealist. And believe me, in his early years, Robespierre was a true, genuine advocate for the people. As a young lawyer, he literally built his entire reputation on defending the poor and the downtrodden. He was super inspired by the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau and this idea of the general will. You know, the idea that what's best for everyone is the ultimate truth. That became Robespierre's North Star. He fought for freedom of the press, he wanted to abolish slavery, and he championed full civil rights for groups that were totally marginalized back then. And he lived this very simple, principled life, which was a huge contrast to the corrupt old monarchy. So you can see why he earned that famous nickname, the Incorruptible. But here's the thing about ideals. They don't always survive contact with reality. And the reality for France was that the revolution wasn't happening in some peaceful vacuum. The country was basically under siege, from the outside and from within. And the pressure just kept mounting and mounting. So in '92, France is at war with Austria and Prussia. Then they execute the king. And suddenly, pretty much all of Europe, Britain, Spain, you name it, is declaring war on France. And at the exact same time, the country is just tearing itself apart with these massive internal rebellions. Paranoia was everywhere. So for revolutionaries like Robespierre, the logic became dangerously simple. If the revolution is good and virtuous, then all these problems must be the work of secret enemies and traitors. And it's right here, in this pressure cooker of crisis and conspiracy, that Robespierre embraces his most terrifying idea, that to build a perfect republic of virtue, you first have to cleanse it with terror. This, of course, led directly to what we now call the Reign of Terror. Basically, for about a year, the government, led by this powerful Committee of Public Safety, just unleashed this wave of state-sponsored violence against anyone they decided was an enemy of the revolution. And you can hear the chilling logic in Robespierre's own words. He really believed that in a revolution, democracy needed both virtue and terror to survive. To the enemies of the people, he said, the republic owes only death. It's so stark, so absolute. Which, of course, begs the question, who exactly were these enemies? You'd probably think it was the old aristocrats, right? Or maybe the clergy who were still loyal to the king. But the reality is actually so much more shocking. It is unbelievable, but when you actually look at the records of who was executed, a whopping 85% of the victims were commoners from the Third Estate. 85%! We're talking peasants, laborers, regular citizens, the very people Robespierre had spent his early career defending. The old enemies, the nobility and clergy, they were just a tiny slice of the pie. So as this paranoia just got more and more intense, the definition of an enemy kept getting wider and wider. And pretty soon, the revolution turned inward and literally began to devour itself. First, Robespierre and his allies got rid of their more moderate political rivals, the Girondins. Gone. Next, they turned on the ultra-radicals to their left, the Hébertists, deciding they were too extreme. Gone. And finally, they came for the moderates in their own faction, the Dantonists, led by Robespierre's own friend, Georges Danton. And his only crime? Suggesting that maybe, just maybe, it was time to end the terror. And what poured gasoline on this fire was a new law, the Law of 22 Prairial. This thing is the stuff of nightmares. It basically stripped the accused of any real defense. No lawyers, no witnesses. The court could now convict you based on nothing more than moral proof, which was essentially just a judge's gut feeling. And there were only two possible verdicts. You walk free or you die. The result of this law was what's now called the Great Terror. In the 47 days after it was passed, 1,375 people were executed in Paris alone. The pace of the killing went from awful to absolutely astronomical.
You know, a fire that burns that hot is bound to burn itself out. This frenzy just couldn't last. Fearing they'd be next, a coalition of his opponents in the government finally moved against Robespierre, and they executed him on July 28, 1794. His death marked the end of the terror, but man, the debate over his legacy was just getting started.
So what are we supposed to make of all this? Was he just a bloodthirsty dictator, or was he a national hero who actually saved France from being destroyed by foreign armies and civil war? Or maybe he was a tragic idealist, a man whose principles were so rigid he couldn't see the monstrous thing he was building. There's no question his actions set a terrifying precedent for state terror used by totalitarian regimes for centuries to come. Which really leaves us with the ultimate unsettling question. Was the terror, as horrific as it was, a necessary price to pay for the revolution's survival? Or was it the moment the revolution completely and utterly betrayed its own beautiful ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity? It's a question people are still fiercely debating today.